In this recording of the first day of our Fundraising Tech Expo, Emma Luzzi from Blue Sky Philanthropy talks about overcoming fear and intimidation to improve your fundraising efforts.
So Emma is an award-winning fundraising expert with more than 20 years experience, raising millions of dollars across the arts, education, health, and human services sectors. Emma is the founder and lead consultant at Blue Sky Philanthropy, where she works with nonprofits to increase their revenue and exceed their fundraising goals by helping them raise more 5, 6, and 7-figure donations. And on that note, I'll hand over to you, Emma.
I love it. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen shared. And while I get set up, I want you to do something for me because this is going to be a very interactive presentation. No sitting back, no multitasking. I want you present and interacting with us because we have a lot of questions for you, and we're going to do some reflection on how we can get better at overcoming fear, intimidation, and overwhelm to raise more money. So while I'm getting set up, this is what I want you to do. Go ahead and type into the chat. I'm going to ask you to get into the chat a lot today. Let me know where you are joining us from. All right, and while we do that, I'm going to get all set up because I like to make sure I've got the chat open and so I can see what's going on over here. Excellent. All right, dining room. Oh my gosh, this is going so fast. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I see Scotland. I see Eugene, Oregon. I see St. Catharines, Buckthorn, Ontario, Philadelphia. Wow, we have people joining us from all over. Beautiful Prince Edward County, Toronto, sunny Vancouver. Welcome everybody, Brantford Six Nations. So nice to see everybody here. And I'm so excited. Hello, Pepito. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dive right in and talk about the goal of our time together today. So what we really want to do today, what I hope to leave you with at the end of this session, I want you to be able to start identifying those key mindset shifts that you need to make to raise more 5- and 6-figure gifts in your organization, right? To build the confidence you need to do that without letting fear, intimidation, and imposter syndrome get in the way. And I want you to hang in there, even if you aren't working in major gifts. There's going to be a lot for you to take away. I've framed this specifically around major gifts because that is my passion. It is an area of work I really focus on, but I think this will be applicable to everybody because mindset is such a big part of, an important part of our work for sure. So I'm gonna go ahead and there we go. All right, so here's the little premise I'm operating from today. And this took me a lot of years to get to, right? This took me over 20 years of fundraising to kind of get to this point where I realized the strategies and the tactics that we're using that are related to major gift success are super important. But I found typically there's nothing that can make or break your success more than mindset. Mindset is absolutely key in all of our fundraising, and it's especially important in major gifts. All right, so here's some challenges. If you're like a lot of the fundraisers I talk to and I work with, here's some challenges I think that you may be experiencing right now. I find often when I work with fundraisers in my online programs and my coaching, all of us are typically operating within a set of limiting beliefs, but it's typically really hard for us to recognize that, right? So this is why limiting beliefs tend to be invisible, they're hard to identify, and they come from all around us, right? So not only are we dealing with our own limiting beliefs about ourselves, we're also dealing with the limiting beliefs that are in our organization and even in our sector as a whole. So we're really going to dig into this deeply today and talk about this a lot deeply today. So this is really, I think, come into sharp relief, especially during the pandemic, right? A lot of the stresses and a lot of the fears we have become magnified this year, right? And that is so natural. That's another thing I want you to take away from today. Everything I'm talking about is very natural and it's very normal. So I want to normalize a lot of these, a lot of these things that we're struggling with in our fundraising, right? And I think probably the biggest challenge in my experience is that we aren't actually taught any of this in schools, right? We aren't talking about this in schools. It doesn't come up at conferences. We're so focused on the how to, on the tactical execution. We don't really dig into what sometimes is the greatest barrier to our fundraising success, and that is mindset. All right. You, if you're like a lot of fundraisers, also probably have some desires when it comes to building your confidence and raising more major gifts, right? You want to build your confidence. You want to increase your comfort levels when it comes to working with big donors. I talk with a lot of fundraisers, and the words that come up so often are the ones that are actually in the title of this presentation. I hear people talk about being intimidated, right? Being intimidated, feeling, feeling like they don't necessarily have the confidence to work with wealthy donors, feeling a sense of imposter syndrome, right? So if you identify with that, I want you to know you're not alone. And because you're here today, I know you have the desire to address this and to start making some change. So I think that's really great news, right? So I think too, I wanted just to speak briefly to the fact that it's been challenging times, right? Is that the understatement of the year? I know if you are, I'm based in Toronto. I know if you're in the area, if you're in Canada, or if you're located anywhere that's been particularly strongly impacted by the pandemic, it has been a tough year. So it's been tricky, right? It's been hard to stay positive, to keep up our momentum during these challenging times, because the pandemic has impacted us in so many ways, right? Very, very challenging for sure. But I think keeping up our momentum right now is so, so important. I know it's been a long, hard road, but I think there is an incredible opportunity ahead of us as we enter into the post-pandemic recovery stage, wherever we may be, wherever we're based, right? Especially when it comes to fundraising and major donors. Major donors have been investing in important work across, and I want to emphasize that here too, across sectors, across different types of organizations. There's been an absolute outpouring of generosity, and I believe that's just going to continue. So it's really important that we both take care of ourselves, but also make sure that we're not losing that healthy momentum to make sure that we are, raising that money that we need for our mission. All right, so you'll remember the goal of our time here together today is to start identifying those specific mindset shifts you need to make to build the confidence you need to start raising more 5- and 6-figure gifts, right? Without letting fear, intimidation, or imposter syndrome get in the way. So let's dive into the content and start off by talking about limiting beliefs. Now, limiting beliefs are so interesting, and they can be so difficult to spot, right? I like to think of it as we're the fish and beliefs are the water. And speaking of water, I'm going to take a quick sip. I've been talking all morning, so I got to stay hydrated. All right, so there's a great parable I always like to share about 2 young fish. And they're swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish going the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, friends, how's the water?" And the 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and then one eventually looks at the other and says, "What the heck is water?" Right? And I think we can be like those fish in waters, right? When it comes to those limiting beliefs, especially those limiting beliefs we have about ourselves, right? These are beliefs that we tend to pick up in childhood. For example, beliefs about money are huge ones that we pick up from our family very early, right? And these can continue to influence us in our day-to-day work if we don't spend the time recognizing and identifying them. So speaking of identifying them, I want to talk about my big limiting belief that I had that I was able to identify that took me a while. And I want to introduce you to my nemesis. It's the 500-pound telephone, right? Picking up the 500-pound phone and calling donors was a big struggle for me at one point in my career. I'm an introvert. right? And as an introvert, there are a lot of things that I told myself that I dislike about the phone. Phone calls can feel intrusive, and oh, I can't read verbal cues, so it's very difficult for me to sort of know what's going on and know how to respond. So for me, what happened was believing this limiting belief started becoming painful. I reached an impasse. I loved getting face to face with her. Loretta says, that phone is so heavy. I know, I identify with that very much, right? But I love getting face to face with donors. It's one of the reasons why I actually got into major gifts. And I know that face to face in-person meetings are not currently available to us. But I really love that one-to-one, getting to know a donor, building the relationship, like uncovering the values and the passion that are really driving their interest and investment in the work. Love that, which is why I ended up specializing in major gifts. So I started thinking, I have an aversion to the phone, but it's getting in the way of actually doing something that I love, and it's getting in the way of being successful. It's getting in the way of not being able to book meetings. I need to be able to pick up that phone and have a conversation, either book a meeting or have that meeting on the phone, right? And I reflected on it for a little bit and started doing some work. And I realized a lot of my aversion about using the phone was discomfort related to my limiting beliefs, both about myself, but also beliefs that I projected onto others. We're going to talk about that as well, right? So, end of the story, I'm still not in love with the phone, but I do know that it's a crucial tool, right? First for me in fundraising, but now even more so in being an entrepreneur and building my business. But here's the thing, before I was able to really get effective in tackling my phone avoidance, I needed to get clear, right? I needed to get clear on exactly what was holding me back. So I want to know, I already heard from Loretta, I want to know who here relates to my story. So it might not be the phone for you, but what else do you feel like is holding you back? Anyone else relate with that 500-pound phone? So hard to pick up. That phone can be so heavy sometimes, even though our phones are a lot lighter than they used to be. Oh, phone, ugh. That says it all. Naomi says, ugh, phone. I know, I feel like a lot of us share these similar feelings. 100% with the phone. It's definitely my last choice. I can relate. I also have phone avoidance. It's so easy to work on important things first before the phone. And I love it. Erin says, I don't mind making the calls. It's more so having the context to call. That's great. And that's a bit of a mindset thing too, Erin. We're going to be talking about that today. Yes, it's very, very challenging. Yes, phone and being mistaken for a telemarketer. Yes, at some point, we're going to talk about this as well. We're going to get hung up on, ooh, right? But we're going to dive into that too, because we're going to talk about how to manage all of that, how to manage all of those fears that come up when we're thinking about picking up the phone, making those phone calls, or for you, it may be something completely different. So let's explore a little bit more. I want to talk about some kind of common limiting beliefs I see popping up. This is not exhaustive. These are just some things I hear fairly commonly, and these are limiting beliefs, I call them, sort of about the world, right? Limiting beliefs about the world outside of us. These can be very, very deep-seated, right? And again, can be tricky to identify sometimes. But here's the thing, here's how you know. They're not always reality, even though they're sometimes true or partially true. So they're rarely the whole truth, even if they seem accurate. So I'm going to share some of these with you. Tell me if these sound familiar. Oh yes, this is a favorite one. There's just so much competition, right? How can we be successful? It's such a crowded market, right? We're going to talk about what's behind that a little bit later. But first, I just wanted us to start being able to recognize these things. Do we hear these ideas, these beliefs around our organizations? Here's another favorite one. I heard this for many years working at a small organization. We're just too small to get big gifts, right? We're not going to get significant investments because we're such a small organization. And finally, this is one that popped up a lot in actually what I would say ways in which were really detrimental to our fundraising last year. It's insensitive or it's inappropriate to fundraise during a pandemic, right? So fascinating. We saw, in the very early days of the pandemic, I can say just even in my work, not with any of my immediate clients, but just in my work and knowing what organizations were doing out there, I saw people suspending their fundraising for extended periods of time. I saw organizations like decimating their revenue centers, anticipating, a terrible downturn. And these limiting beliefs can actually range from everything to a little bit pesky to actually, if we don't recognize them, being able to do some serious damage to our organizations, right? And I love this. Moira is saying our donors have been more generous than ever during the pandemic. That's what I'm seeing across organizations. I work with arts organizations. I work with human services organizations. I work with education organizations. Everyone has reported across the board, if they continue to ask effectively, their donors are continuing to be generous, right? So these are some limiting beliefs, again, not exhaustive, but some limiting beliefs I've seen come up pretty frequently about the world at large. Now, here's one that is interesting, right? This is a second type of limiting belief, and that's limiting beliefs we have about others, right? And these can be stories they tell ourselves. If anybody has experience in major gifts, you've probably thought this at some point. Oh, he's just too busy to meet with me. I'm not even going to try, right? So that unto itself is a limiting belief. This is one that we heard coming up a lot during the pandemic time. Oh, no, they can't possibly give right now. The stock market's taken a terrible hit. And I have to tell you, I have been fundraising for many, many years and actually had, the honor and the challenge of fundraising through the Great Recession. And it was very interesting to see how this belief came up and the impact it had on fundraising, right? Because again, we're making assumptions about our donors based on beliefs that aren't even necessarily that are founded on assumptions rather than conversations with our donors, right? So just keep a lookout for that for sure. Here's a big one that ties back into money. Let me know if this sounds familiar. Wealthy donors only care about recognition and putting their name on something, right? We have a lot of limiting beliefs actually about people who have wealth in terms of how they behave and what they want. And that one often comes up, right? Is all about recognition. And again, of course, the beliefs often, they become beliefs because they can sometimes be true. That is sometimes true, right? I would say one thing to look out for around limiting beliefs, if it seems very all or nothing, right? Only, always, never, I would say that's always a good flag, right? Always a good flag. Is that actually true, right? In my experience, it's not. There are donors I've worked with who are interested in recognition, but certainly is not, only the case, and certainly is not even the majority of major donors in my experience. So yes, these ones come up a lot as well. And now, finally, I wanted to share some examples that may also sound familiar. These are limiting beliefs about ourselves, and these can actually be some of the toughest to spot in my experience, right? They're so tied to our identity that it can be hard to separate them out. But here's a hint I have for you when you're trying to identify these. If you think I'm just good at this or I'm terrible at that, that could be a limiting belief. So here are some common ones. I hear this a lot as an introvert. I'm an introvert, so I'm no good at networking. Don't ask me to network. I'm no good at donor meetings, right? That's a limiting belief we kind of built around our identity as an introvert. Here's another one for anyone who's ever procrastinated, which is all of us, is we kind of incorporate that into our identity. I'm just a procrastinator. That's just the way it is. I have a hard time getting started on new projects. And this final one, I think, if there's any cause for us, I was reflecting on this idea of perfectionism, this my limiting belief about perfectionism. I have to get this absolutely perfect. Major donors will not settle for anything less. I was reflecting on this as I was working on this presentation about perfectionism and how much it can actually slow our progress and damage our results if we buy into this. And in major gifts, we absolutely have a perfectionism problem. We have a perfectionism problem at our organizations. We have a perfectionism problem oftentimes ourselves. And I believe perfectionism has resulted in leaving hundreds of millions of dollars on the table because it gets in the way of us taking action, right? And quite frankly, nobody is ever 100% perfect. It's not a reasonable expectation to have of a human being. So perfectionism really gets in the way. So if you identify with any of these, William's saying introverts have been proven to be better fundraisers. I write about this a lot, William, because I am a very strong advocate for how great and the natural strengths that introverts tend to bring to major gift fundraising, especially because we are really good at focusing our attention. We're really good at deep listening. So we bring unique strengths to the table for sure, as do extroverts, right? Extroverts also bring unique strengths, but I think they're often overvalued, and introvert strengths are undervalued when it comes to fundraising. Wes identifies as an introvert non-perfectionist. I agree with you. I am also now a non-perfectionist, but it took me a while to get there, my friends. So I want you now to take a minute to reflect before we move on. I want you to notice at least one limiting belief that's impacting your fundraising. So you can do a couple of things here. You can write this down for yourself, or even better, I'd love for you to share it in the chat, because quite frankly, if you are feeling it, somebody else is feeling the same way too, right? So I want you to take a minute and reflect what's one limiting belief that you think might be impacting your fundraising. Go ahead and share that in the chat, because that will help others as well. Our organization is too small and too new to ask for big gifts. I hear that one very commonly. Yeah, we're just too small. I see that sometimes impacting smaller organizations in terms of under asking, right? So they may ask, but they may under ask when a donor has greater capacity and passion and actually wants to give more, right? This is why fundraising should be done in teams, one introvert and one extrovert. Interesting. Ashley says, I have to get this perfect. You're not alone in that. That is absolutely a massive challenge. And I've seen that hold so many fundraisers back. Aaron saying, oh my goodness, sorry, as you're going fast, I just want to make sure I'm not missing any. People won't take me seriously because I'm young. I love that. The whole, that comes into play as well. And that kind of perception can also impact us as well as we age, right? So, it's interesting being someone who is now getting some gray hairs, and, it definitely can be a belief we carry along with us. I've heard that I'm too young, I'm too old. Our data isn't clean enough to confidently reach out and communicate with our donors. I'm too new for people to take me seriously. I think too small. These are all great. Thank you so much for sharing these. Oh, deep pockets. I see a deep pockets comment. That is fear of rejection, negative reaction from a donor. We're talking about that today as well. Somebody else struggling with age, or rather how people perceive me as a youngin', right? So I may delay making asks to older donors. That's really interesting. All right. If people had money to give, they would just give it. Unfortunately, we know that's not true, right? Whoa, my goodness, friends, these are so many good ask overload. We're a small city. Everyone keeps going to the same donors over and over again. Donor fatigue, my friends. Donor fatigue is a limiting belief. You heard it here first. No, you probably didn't hear it here first, but I truly believe that when people talk about donor fatigue, I do think it's a limiting belief, right? It's not actually true. I don't think it's even true some of the time. I want to ask you a follow-up question now. What's the result when we buy into these beliefs? What result do we get when we buy into these beliefs? And I'm going to share an example with you while you type in for me. I'm going to look at the example of perfectionism. How I see perfectionism play out is not taking action oftentimes. People don't take action because they're waiting to get it perfect, but they never get it perfect, so they never pick up the phone. And that way they never move forward, even imperfectly, because we're waiting, doing more work until we get it perfect. So the result is we don't take action. If we don't take action, we don't raise money, right? And I'm seeing this too. We're missing giving people an opportunity to give that only we can give them, right? Yes, just getting stuck, not taking action for sure. Sorry. Woo. Yes, we're limited in our ability to make the ask. It's very limiting to us, absolutely. So yeah, there's a big impact I think on all of us, on our organizations, on our mission, but also on ourselves, right? On ourselves and our success as fundraisers. So great work, everybody. Great work. I love that you just dove in here and got hands-on with this. And I think I really want to encourage you to take this away with you as well. This can be a super useful exercise, right? You could think about this and say, you know what? Really don't want to pick up the phone right now. What's going on, right? Just reflecting on that, you know, and I'll give you a few more tips when we get into our next section. But starting to recognize when these thoughts may be coming up, when these beliefs may be coming up, and looking at how they may be impacting our results, or, you know, what happens when we actually buy into these beliefs. I was buying into the belief about, you know, I don't like the phone, I'm an introvert, I don't like feeling like I interrupted people. My result was I wasn't connecting with donors who I wanted to connect with. I wasn't building the relationships that I want because I was too held back from picking up the phone. All right, so, okay. All right, let's move on. And if you have more questions, we're gonna have time at the end to answer those. So if you have any questions that come up during the course of the presentation, we'll definitely deal with those at the end, but I just wanted to make sure I got through all of the content here before we fielded a lot of questions. So, all right, so let's talk about working with fear. We're going to look at how to work with some common fears. There are fears that will inevitably arise during the course of our major gift work, in fact, during the course of any of our fundraising work. But just being able to recognize those is really important, can be a huge step forward in terms of getting more and better results. So here is a fact. Mother Nature has made us highly threat reactive, right? So there's this concept, you know, that is shared or has been popularized by Dr. Rick Hansen, who's done a lot of really interesting work on neuroplasticity. And he talks a lot about the idea of the paper tiger effect. So basically, Mother Nature wants us to be alarmed at 1,000 paper tigers in order to miss it, you know, in order to make sure we don't miss a single real tiger who might be hiding behind a rock and waiting to pounce, right? This has evolved as a super useful protective mechanism over millions of years of evolution, right? So turns out we're hardwired this way, right? And neuroscientists refer this to negativity bias. You've probably heard of this before, but I think it really impacts our fundraising, and it's a useful thing to spend a bit of time unpacking. So here's how negativity bias works. Essentially, just to make the idea as simple as possible, we more clearly remember and give weight to events and experiences we perceive as negative over those we perceive as positive, right? So what happens is our brain is scanning for bad news constantly, it spots some, and it fast tracks that into your brain, right? That's how our brains are designed, and it's a survival mechanism. So I want to be clear here when I'm talking about negativity bias, right? That I'm not suggesting there are not very real threats out there right now, right? Like real tigers. So, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Many of us are dealing with the unequal impacts of COVID. We're dealing with the continued threat of racist violence. There are truly some real threats to our health and safety out there. But what I believe the key to negativity bias is being able to start determining the difference between a very real threat that we need to take action on, so the real tiger that we need to take action on to protect ourselves, and a perceived threat. So that's the paper tiger that may be getting in the way of taking action. Because there's a lot at stake at our organizations, right? When we don't recognize how negativity bias impacts our decision-making about perceived threats, our fundraising suffers, right? And more importantly, our mission suffers. I love this quote from Dr. Rick Hansen, again, who kind of sums it up nicely in a nutshell. Negativity bias essentially makes us overestimate threats, underestimate opportunities, and underestimate resources. So if you apply this to your fundraising, I think you can see this showing up as well, right? We've seen a lot of this actually heightened, I would say, over the past year, especially when it comes to underestimating opportunities, like making assumptions that donors are going to stop giving, so not even asking. So negativity bias is having a really big impact on our work. So it's really useful to start recognizing how that comes into play. I want to also be clear here too, there's a difference between recognizing negativity bias and this idea of toxic positivity. So I'm not saying that, you should be, that, you have to always be positive and that kind of thing. Negativity bias, or recognizing it, to me, is a little more about bringing us into balance, right? So if we know that we're going to be more quick to recognize, scan for bad news, recognize the bad news and fast track it into our brains, how do we bring ourselves back into a little more balance, right? So yes, all right. Let's talk a little bit about negativity bias and how that can tend to feed into fear, right? Which is also another perfectly normal function of your brain, right? It's a really useful concept to get your head around. It took me a while to get used to this. When I felt fear around my fundraising, I always thought, something's wrong, right? But really important thing I want you to know, it's just your brain doing its job when you feel fear. Fear, like negativity bias, is just hardwired into your brain. And here's a newsflash: everyone feels fear, whether they admit it or not, right? And often what happens is we get scared because we're imagining what could happen, right? As we push out of our comfort zone. But it's through taking action that's outside of our comfort zone. That's really the only way we can expand that comfort zone and grow. So that's the challenge for us, right? Here's the reality, is that you will always feel fear as you can continue to grow, because essentially your comfort zone is growing and you keep pushing out of your comfort zone, and that always feels a little bit scary, right? But here's the good news, is it can actually be a good sign that you're continuing to challenge yourself, right? So here are 3 normal fears that you can expect to arise over the course of your major gift work or your fundraising in general. So this one came up for me recently. Speaking about introverts, pardon me, I actually wrote about how introverts make the best major gift fundraisers recently. And when I posted that on Facebook, I got a lot of critical comments. And it's funny, I read one of them that was, I'd maybe say it's even a little bit nasty, and I could feel my heart starting to race, right? And heat was rising in my face, and my throat and my chest started feeling tight. And it was very funny because I thought, oh, logically, I have nothing to be afraid of, right? This is a troll on Facebook. They can't do anything to harm me. I don't have anything to be afraid of. But this is a totally, totally normal human reaction to feeling judged, okay? I mention this because I think a key to working with fear is to start noticing how it shows up for you in your body. So neuroanatomist Jill Bolt Taylor wrote a great book called My Stroke of Insight. She notes that the physiological lifespan of an emotion in the body and the brain is about 90 seconds. So these sensations, they arise, the adrenaline, the heat in the face, the tightness in the throat, the rapid heartbeat, or however you may experience it, they arise, they peak, and they dissipate on their own, right? So I love this. And I'm seeing in the comments people saying, I fear judgment. I physically can feel it in my throat, right? I get really stressed when I have to speak publicly. I feel you, right? And I think sometimes people think that those of us who are out there doing webinars and speaking in the context I'm speaking today, I have it all together, that I have banished and eliminated fear from my life. And I will tell you that is absolutely not the case. I was sharing with the other panelists, I said, I still get a little bit of sweaty palms, before I come on to do a presentation. I still get a bit of the rapid heartbeat. Totally, totally normal, right? And everyone's different. Stephanie's saying totally opposite. Public speaking does not bother me a lick. So everyone's a little different. I think the key here is to notice, right? When you do feel that fear reaction, is just to notice where that's showing up in your body. So I want to ask you this. How does fear of judgment show up in your major gifts? Okay, feeling intimidated by wealthy donors, I find, is a common facet of this fear. We sometimes create stories in our heads about how we may be judged and found wanting by donors, right? So I think this is my favorite antidote to this, is to remember that most people are so busy thinking about themselves that they're not necessarily thinking about you, including their own fears of being judged, right? One of my favorite things to say about major donors is we forget major donors are human too, right? Major donors are human too. They see and feel that emotion. They have that fear of judgment as well. So, everyone's a little different. So just reflect for you, right? It's like, where do you see fear coming up in your major gifts? And when you do, get a little curious about what that feels like, right? That's a really useful exercise for sure. Okay. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I had a bit of a lag on changing my slide there. Okay, so kind of connected. These are all interconnected, right? Fear of judgment is interconnected with fear of rejection. This is a really big one when it comes to major gifts, right? It can sometimes actually prevent us from properly soliciting our donors. So we get stuck in a never-ending cycle of cultivation. I see that happening sometimes. Maybe that resonates with you as well. It can also show up in smaller ways, I think, that can prevent us from taking action. I think for me, the root of my dislike of the phone is fear of rejection, right? Of being hung up on, or someone saying no. So it can take practice, but I think as we take action and do this work, despite our discomfort, hearing no becomes easier. And in fact, I want to leave you with no can be good news. No can be good news in many ways. And if you're not hearing no often enough, you may not actually be doing enough active work around identifying and qualifying donors for your portfolio, right? So just something to watch out for there, because I think we very much fear hearing no, but it is a necessary and healthy part of our major gift fundraising, and it's absolutely going to happen, right? It's just about managing that fear and knowing, recognizing it and seeing it come up, getting curious about it. All right, and if I've missed any questions, no worries. We're going to have time to work through them at the end. So thank you for holding those. So let's talk a little bit about fear of scarcity. This one shows up so powerfully at the organizational level from my experience. And I think it can actually be one of the toughest to address. In fact, I would say our scarcity mentality is even an issue at the sectoral level, right? So, scarcity mentality, it can feed into that sense of competing, right? I think this is where that idea of like there's so much competition comes up. That the root of that is scarcity mentality, 100%, because it's a decision that we've made that there's a limited pie, right? So that's 100% scarcity thinking, that we're competing for what is perceived as a limited piece of a limited pie. And, I see this happening even internally at organizations, which is how silos tend to develop, right? Let's say you're in a larger organization, you have a silo between annual giving and major gifts at a larger shop. And there's a little bit of, a colleague of mine calls it being a donor owner, where it's like, okay, we don't want to let go someone who's giving to annual because we're going to lose that revenue from our goals. So we won't allow major gifts, for example, to qualify an annual donor for their major gift portfolio. That can definitely be scarcity thinking. And again, that can be very much part of a cultural piece of an organization, and especially even at the sectoral level. So I think a lot of our siloing issues come down to this scarcity mentality, right? So, and I think what I want to leave you with there is it's really important to remember that fundraising is not a zero-sum game, right? It never has been, it never will be. And in fact, I believe very strongly through better fundraising, we can actually grow that pie of donors, right? So watch out for this. This is a a fear and a limiting belief. Oh, I'm getting a bit tangled up here. A fear and a limiting belief that can really impact it. It can be very difficult to spot. And it's often something we just take as truth, right? Something we just take as truth. So watch out for that. That's a super, super common one. All right. Yes. Okay. So let's move into the final portion of my presentation. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And I'm going to talk about 3 things that I have found that set the most successful major gift fundraisers apart from the rest. And again, even if you're not in major gifts, I think you will find a lot of these ideas applicable for you as a fundraiser. I think you may also be surprised. These may not be, factors that you have expected, but I think they're principles that every fundraiser can put to use to improve their results. Okay, so the first success factor in the framework is focus, right? So I hear from so many donors, this is such a big challenge, even before the pandemic, but especially during the pandemic. This sense of overwhelm, the sense of being pulled in so many different directions, wearing so many hats, this can pose a real challenge to us, right? But the most successful fundraisers, even if they do wear a lot of hats, they tend to be really focused in on their highest priority activities, right? The high value activities that are really going to move the needle on their major gift results. And they focus on those even when those activities push them out of their comfort zone. Now, I want to recognize that this is a big challenge right now for those of you who were talking a little bit earlier. Like if you're working with home and you have small children, actually getting significant swaths of focus time can be so, so challenging, right? So I want to share with you something I love to share with my students just to encourage you a little bit, because I think when you can find small pockets of time to focus on your highest priorities, whatever they are, that they can really add up over time, right? So let's use an example of reading. Let's say you want to read a little bit more, but it's hard to find time to focus in your busy day. So let's look at setting aside 10 minutes a day to do something you're really passionate about, getting more reading done. You think of that 10 minutes a day, that adds up to a whole hour in a week, right? Hey, and a lot of you might be saying, especially if you got kids at home, I never thought I could find an hour in a week to read, right? So, and if you look at that hour a week over the course of a month, it actually adds up to 4 hours. So like a whole half day a month you could spend focusing on your highest priority. And I think you really see the impact of like this incremental investment, this incremental, focus when you're looking at the course of a year. 10 minutes a day adds up to a full work week, the equivalent of a full work week over the course of a year. So I really want to encourage you, if you're listening to this and thinking, how can I possibly focus right now? There is value even in focusing in very small increments of time, and you can really, really get a lot done, which is not to say that, you have to be productive every second of every day. But if there's something that's really important to you, you can actually get great results and great movement, even with a smaller commitment, a smaller time investment. So I really want to encourage you, if you feel challenged to focus right now, just start small, because you can get such great results with incremental improvement. Okay, so the next success factor is having a plan. That's something I'm very passionate about. So the best fundraisers, they do not leave their relationship building to chance, right? They have a clear month-by-month plan on how they're engaging their top donors. They also take time to plan their week, right? They make sure they're blocking out time, even if it's just a small amount of time, to take action and focus on their biggest fundraising priorities. All right, so when you bring together focus and a plan, that gives you clarity, right? Having clarity on your way forward is such an important part of actually addressing the fear we've been talking about today, right? The overwhelm, the uncertainty that so many fundraisers feel when it comes to major gifts. So you bring focus and a plan together, that gives you something beautiful, which is clarity on your way forward. Who does not want that, right? All right. And then the final principle in this framework is really around action. You'll see this has become a theme today, right? Because none of what you've learned today is actually going to make a difference unless you take action on it, right? And again, even committing to one small manageable action can help. And guess what you get when you have a plan you start taking action on? It's something that is coveted by so many fundraisers. It's confidence, right? You start building confidence when you have a plan that you take action on. I think one of the biggest learnings in my fundraising career, as well as working with my coaching and consulting clients, there is no shortcut to confidence. I'm afraid you cannot take a magic pill and become confident. It's actually taking action that builds that confidence muscle and like increases that comfort level, right? So confidence, if that's what we want, we really do need to make sure we've got a plan and that we're taking action on that plan. Even again, it's just incremental steps forward, right? Okay. Finally, when you're focusing on the right things and you're taking consistent action on growing your major gifts, that's when you get results, right? It's pretty simple, but as I say fairly often, simple is not necessarily easy, right? Okay, so just to recap, when you're focusing on the right things and you have a plan to execute, that's when you get clarity on your way forward. When you take action on that plan, that's when you build confidence, something we're all looking for more of as major gift fundraisers. And when you take consistent action in the right area of focus, that's when you get results. All right, so does that make sense to everybody? That's in a nutshell, I truly believe, the path forward to major gift success. All right, so let's have a look back at everything we've covered so far today. We looked at some common limiting beliefs that are impacting your fundraising. We talked about what to do when fear inevitably arises during your work with major donors. We looked at some examples of common fears that tend to arise during the course of our fundraising. And we looked at the simple framework that every fundraiser needs to master for real major gift success. All right, so this leads us to an important question, right? And that is this. How do you take action to implement the ideas that you've learned today and not just let this be another session that you attended, right? So I want to ask you something here before I open up for questions. Who here has resonated with the content today? And I want to hear, what have you found most valuable from the presentation today? So go ahead and type that into the chat box. I'm going to take a sip of my water, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So what have you found most valuable from the presentation today? What do you want to take away and implement in your work? Put that into the chat box. And the nice thing about being here in a group, you put that into the chat box and you'll be much more likely to stay accountable for that. All right. Implementing designated time to focus. So good, Carrie. I agree. And I think that has made, as a practice, has made a really big difference in terms of both my fundraising and my business. Blocking that time off and keeping that commitment to myself. Focus with plan brings clarity, and clarity helps overcome fears. Yeah, I love that. Making a plan to focus on building donor relationships. Yes, don't fear no, and don't feel like I have to have all the answers before reaching out to someone. Thank you, Ashley. That's such an important point. I think that's how we often get held up as well. I feel like I have to have all the answers. And so therefore that stops me from picking up the phone. Focus plus plan plus action. You need all three. That is right, my friends. Refocusing on plans and stop working from moment to moment. Yeah, that's an important shift, is to stop working reactively and start working proactively. And I think it's possible for all of us. Right? All right, I love this. So the power of incremental steps forward. Love it. All right, my friends. So let us go ahead, resonating fully with feeling imposter syndrome, remembering that you need to take action before you get more confidence, not the other way around. Yes, I love that. That is such an important takeaway. And I really appreciate you. You've said this better than I have, right? I love that, you putting that into your own words. It is only through taking action that we can build confidence. We can't sit and wait for confidence to arrive and want that to drive our action, right? That's the wrong way around. So Okay, let me go ahead and say thank you. I'm Emma, and I'm going to open it up for questions now. And I hope you will stay in touch with me. Here's how you can find me. I'm active on social media. I hope you will stay in touch. And it's been such a pleasure and an honor being able to work with you here today and talk about this topic that's very close to my heart, right? So, and I'm really want to thank you for jumping right into that chat and being interactive. So let's open it up. Alex, 2 questions. Can I see the Q&A, or are there questions that came up during the presentation in the chat box that I missed?
Yeah, I don't think anything was missed out. Excuse me, sorry, I need water as well, clearly. Yeah, we had a couple of questions. One from Anonymous, asking what kinds of gratitude is appropriate for donors. I guess that means stewardship and thanking and those kinds of things.
Yes, here's the beauty of major gift fundraising is it depends, right? But the beauty of, if we're thinking in the context of major gifts, is what is appreciated and appropriate, or however we may want to put it, may be different for everybody, right? So this is one of the things I think that is most valuable in terms of building relationships with donors, is just understanding more what they value in terms of recognition, right? And not making an assumption around, all donors want recognition, which is definitely not always the case. They may wish to, they may wish to keep in touch with you in different ways. So I would say it's a difficult, my answer is it depends. There are many, many ways to appreciate your donors, and in major gifts that may vary from donor to donor based on, their interest, based on, their inclination. One thing I will recommend, that I recommend to all of my students, is really, as you're figuring this out with your donors, mix up your channels, right? Because I see people being way too over dependent on email. Comfort zone, right? Because it's more comfortable than picking up the phone, but you need to think of it from my perspective of, I'm thinking, in person, or whatever's replicating in person right now, like Zoom calls. I'm thinking about the telephone as its own channel. I'm thinking, about digital channels in terms of email. I've even kind of pulled video out onto its own. I'm actually working on a presentation coming up for AFP Toronto Fundraising Day. I'm using video to connect with your top donors, because I think it's such an underutilized way to keep in touch with your donors. There's so many great platforms right now in terms of personalized video. They're really affordable, they're really accessible. Again, it's kind of a mindset thing, because people have a lot of reservations about appearing on video. So that is not something that's been tapped into yet. But my advice to you would be, get to know your donors, because the beautiful thing about major gifts relationships is you can customize that experience, for your donors in terms of, how they like to hear from you. Some people, a lot of major donors like phone, but not all of them do. Some of them may prefer mail or email. Oh, mail, of course. Mail, email, digital, in person. Just keep that in mind and make sure that you're not over depending on a channel that's in your comfort zone. Like email, I've seen people spending what email's super effective. I'm all about email, but it needs to be part of a bigger package. If you're only ever emailing, or if you're over dependent on email, that's a great time to step back and say, should I be picking up the phone more? Are there other ways I can reach out to my donor that aren't just email? So something to be aware of. Hopefully that's helpful. I think that talking about stewarding your major donors could be its whole own session and or program. So I won't be able to kind of dive into it too deeply today, but hopefully that is helpful kind of initial tips for you.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Emma. We had another question. This one is asking, what's the one thing you want everyone to do this afternoon? Like one takeaway, one thing they can take to their desk, Or...
I love it. I would like for you, if you did not do the exercise around kind of identifying a limiting belief or a fear, I'd love you to take the time to reflect on that and write it down. Maybe you think of something that you feel like is really holding you back. I want you I'll ask you to take a small step, just identify something and write it down and start reflecting on it, and keep it in mind next time, and think about that question I asked you as well. you know, what's the result of buying into this limiting belief, right? How is it holding me back? And just to start, you know, recognizing when it might be getting in the way. For example, to continue our phone example, is it getting in the way of you doing something you want to and need to do to get results? And then next time, this is more than one takeaway, but think of it as a package. Identify the belief, write it down, and start noticing when it comes up, when you're about to do the thing that you know, that's maybe holding you back from doing. So I think I would say, like, more than anything, starting to get curious about this can be super helpful. There's immense power in curiosity. And curiosity could be, you know, identifying those beliefs, identifying those fears. You know, if it's accessible to you, just thinking about, oh yeah, how does that show up in my body in a non-judgmental way? It's like, oh yeah, heat in my face, tightness in my throat, right? It's okay though, because I know that when I'm about to pick up the phone, sometimes, you know, some fears arise and I have some limiting beliefs about that. So just starting to recognize all these things, you know, as much as you can, kind of in that package I just talked about, I think, you know, it can absolutely move you forward, because my experience has been, once you start doing that, there's a bit of a cascade effect, right? Where you start being like, oh, I never noticed that before either, right? Okay, let's get curious about that. Let's reflect on that, you know, and see in what ways it may be getting in the way of or impacting, you know, results I want to achieve. So I don't know if that's a simple takeaway, but if it was one takeaway, I'd say get curious and just start noticing, because there's great power in that for sure.
Love that. Thank you. That's fantastic. We had another question from Moira. This was like, I think about half an hour ago. She had to go to a meeting, so she may not still be here. And it's related to your own background, like any courses or like your kind of experience in major donor and major gift fundraising. Like, are there any courses that you've done that you would recommend? Like, that would be great to know.
Yeah, for sure. So I have largely learned through doing, I would say, because I started out quite a few years ago. So I often say I started out when there wasn't necessarily a lot of professional development you could do. So I learned by doing and having mentors. I've definitely done a lot of professional development like this, or in the context of AFP, Association of Fundraising Professionals. And in fact, I have created my own program around major gifts. It's called Major Gift Master Plan. So I've taken everything that I've learned in, you know, close to 25 years of fundraising and major gifts in small, mid-size, and large shops, and put that into an online program. So I will recommend my program, because we do things, if today resonated with you, we do a lot of work around thinking about mindset and reflecting on, you know, our own fears and how they might be getting in the way of our major gift work. So, but yeah, for sure, I think, you know, getting involved with AFP is useful. Coming to things like this wisely, thanks for putting this together. Like, there's some great free professional development opportunities out there. So, but I will leave you with, I think, again, taking action and doing is one of the greatest ways that you can learn, right? So I'm a real advocate for that. It's like, you know, when you learn something, take it back to the office and implement it, right? Even if you know you're not going to do it perfectly, because you're not going to do it perfectly, because none of us do. So I think that's like, actually implementing what you learn can probably be one of the best schools of all.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of demands on our time, and like in fundraising, there's always so much coming at you. You know, there's like so much to do, so much you need to finish, and like it's great to focus and, you know, have that one takeaway this afternoon and like focus on that and build around it. So yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. Any other questions? I see, yes, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to see you there, and I would love to keep in touch and hear how implementing what you've learned today is going for you.